And tonight's topic is one that I think has been had or people have been talking about in many different corners at home, at work, and the news. And the topic is there a war on men? And to break it down even further, let's look at the black man and white man. Do black men have a harder struggle in life than most? And are white men considered privileged? Or do they have a privilege in life? We know that on the media, we're being told that there's this thing called toxic masculinity. I don't know if you believe in it or you think it exists or not, but it is out there, and we're going to try to cover it. In addition to that, we're also going to talk about a posting that one of our guests, Joe Collins, who's a candidate for Congress in California's 43rd District and a former US Navy veteran and native of South Central LA, posted on his social media platform about black men and struggles as related to himself. He got a lot of pushback. So we're going to talk to him about that. Also, I have joining me Josh Spodek, who's a best-selling author and 3 times TEDx speaker and the host of Sustainable Life. He and I have had conversations about toxic masculinity, but more so looking at white men and if there's a struggle that white men have. And him saying that he felt that at times people look at him and just assume that he didn't have to work for anything, that it just came natural, white privilege. So join us in the conversation, myself and my host at Small Town Andrew, as we try to tackle this all too important topic. We're not trying to find a solution. We're not trying to say we have all the answers. But what we do feel is that a conversation should be had without shutting down the other person. Because if we're to understand each other, as many of us say we should, we have to have that dialogue. And yes, the dialogue might be uncomfortable at times. And sometimes you might want to scream. But if we sit and listen to the other person to see what they have to say, to walk in their shoes, so to speak, I'm sure that we'll gain a lot and understand a lot. So without further ado, let me open it up to my guest, as I mentioned, Joe Collins. How's it going?
It's going good. Thank you for having me.
And Josh Spodek. Josh, how's it going?
Very good. Glad to be here.
And our co-host, Heather Robinson and BB Diamond. Ladies, how are you feeling?
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
I'm feeling wonderful. Thank you so much.
Good. So without further ado, let me put up the post that Joe got a lot of kickback or flack on. Here we go, right here. Now, he put this up on Facebook. I was just surfing Facebook, and then immediately I saw some of the responses that he was getting. What I thought was interesting is that some of the responses were from people who supported Joe in the past. I mean, and they were going full throttle, and some of them were saying, oh my gosh, why are you bringing this up? And they had a few other colorful words. But he was saying, okay, this is my experience. This is what I'm going through. Some even said, well, what about the white man? What about the Asian? What about the Indian? But what I thought was interesting is that when Joe put this up, like he was attacked immediately, as opposed to people saying, okay, explain. And if they did say it, Joe, what are your thoughts?
I think that people don't want to listen.
Okay, go ahead.
I can hear him all right.
Okay.
Yeah, no, my mic isn't muted. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yep.
So I think people don't want to listen. I'm a Republican, conservative values, and I think one of the biggest issues that I have as a Republican in the party is we have talking faces that tell everybody what to think about the Black community. Now, one thing that I try to tell people to understand is the perspective from everybody else. Like, I'm not a Candace Owens, I'm not a Brandon Tatum, I'm not all of these mainstream conservative Black talking faces. Our experiences are totally different. I grew up in South Central Los Angeles, and so what I posted was what I went through, or what a lot of Black men in my community who can relate to me went through. It had nothing to do with the experience of a white person. It had nothing to do with the experience of a Latino or Asian. And the reason why is because I can't speak from that perspective. I can only speak from my own perspective. And that picture really resonated with me. And one thing that people didn't understand was when I said, if you can't understand what I'm saying or how I feel about this picture, then you have to keep your mouth shut. And everybody got upset. Well, you can't tell us to shut up, or why does a white man pointing a gun at a black kid? And I think that people absolutely miss the point. I'm not speaking from the perspective of everybody else. I'm not being a victim. I couldn't be a victim because I'm very successful. So people, they talk about how Democratic policies destroy Black communities. And, they get riled up about Democrats on a regular basis and how they've been failed leaders. But when somebody who is a conservative, who lived in the Democrat community, who grew up in a Democratic household, talk about the issues that we go through, and all of a sudden nobody wants to hear it, when these issues are absolutely relevant to us being able to understand what it is that we go through in the inner city and being able to relate to people so we can relate and win elections, but not only win elections, but create policy that's going to benefit people who live in the community where I'm from. And I know it's easy to say, make better choices, or, go to school, or this, that, and the other. But what about when your influencers are gang members, rappers, and, your mom? What about when you have failed public education? What about when your college graduation rate is only 27%? What happens when you don't have jobs? What happens when you don't have the ability to make the choices that everybody think come so easily? And that's how we get stuck into the streets. And so when you have somebody who made it out of the streets, made it out of the hood, joined the military, coming back, and now is trying to do something positive for my community, and the first thing I do is talk about my experiences, and then people get upset at me. Do I care? Not necessarily. No, I really don't care. But I think it's pretty sad.
Right. Interesting. And Josh, you and I have spoken about something similar from a white man's perspective. What do you say?
I spent a lot of time talking about how I feel a lot of times my voice is taken for granted or projected on me. And just based on how I normally approach these things, I would expect that I would, when you told me about this image, I thought, oh, it's going to be something that ignores me or something like that. I looked at it. I'm not a black man, but I looked at that and I thought, this is perfectly reasonable. I can't, it was, to me, that people would get mad at that is surprising. It's a clear statement of, well, it's not it's a statement with that says a lot of things. It's going to say different things to different people. But it was clear to me that this was, and I could be wrong, but it seemed to me this was the voice of someone who felt accosted from all different sides with all these different competing different things, some of which probably they would like, but most of which are probably distractions from a better life. And yet that's their life. If people had a problem with that, it would suggest to me a misunderstanding, a lack of empathy, because it made me feel for a condition that I, to some degree, face. But most of those things, most of the things put in the face of this person were not put in my face, but things somewhat like them were put in my face. I can't see. I mean, if I force myself, I can. But to have a problem with that, to push back at Joe for having put that up, that's not, it's what would I call it? It's not oversensitivity. It would be, I would think, a lack of empathy, a lack of compassion, which I see a lot of. I mean, that's one of the things I get back to a lot of is when you talk about a war, is there a war on men? To me, it's less of a war. It might look like that, but it's a more of lack of empathy, taking for granted of who we are. And therefore, not giving us the credit, the sympathy, the empathy that any human, I would think, deserves. I mean, we thrive when we get it, and it's really sucks when we feel misunderstood.
Right. But as a white man, in conversations that we've had before, do you think that, I've heard Joe's position as like he was saying that these are some of the things that black men, he's not saying that all black men, but certain black men in those conditions, things that they encounter, some oftentimes on a daily basis. But as a white man, when people assume or take for granted that, hey, things came easily for him, do you feel as if though that you're not being heard, or you're grouped into this category that here's a white man he's toxic because when you look around you today, white men are catching it. No one wants to hear anything that you have to say. So what would you say to that?
Yeah, I would say that I have had access to things that probably a lot of other people have not.
Mm-hmm. Is it because you're privileged?
It's a loaded term. Certainly, how do I put it? I grew up in a society where in the past and in the present, that more people with more material wealth and power tended to be white and male. That's still the case to some degree, less now, I think, than before. But what really gets me is that one, I have to bend over backward and make it very, very clear. I know that. If I don't say that a lot, then people will lecture me about it. Then after I say that, whether I say that or not, what I find is that when people say you have this privilege, that becomes the singular way that they see me. I'm one white male. They don't seem to, my individuality seems lost. I can't say everybody has that happen or does that to me, but I feel that a lot. Like, that's just me. And people don't ask me questions. What was your life like? Did you have the privilege that I expected? Was it different for you than anybody else? They just tell me, like, this is how it is. And it's very frustrating. It's dehumanizing. It's de-individualizing. I don't like being told who I am. I don't think anybody likes that.
Right. Joe, let me ask you, from just looking at your feed and the people who were coming out at you, from what I could see, and I could be wrong, there were a lot of people that had supported you in the past, and they were saying, okay, now you lost us, we're not going to support you, or we don't support you anymore. And a lot of them were, from what I could see, were white. Why do you think that this was such a hot button issue? And these are supposed to be conservatives, Republicans. Why was it such a hot button issue? And as you said, if we're supposed to bring in everyone into our party, these are topics or discussions we've got to have. But why was it so, people were offended by it? Why do you think?
Well, I think that people want to ignore the real issues that we have to face in the inner cities. And from my perspective, you can't do it. You can't ignore my reality. You can't ignore what makes me who I am. And I think, one of the biggest things is everybody looks at things a certain way, and everybody want to make it seem like race is not an issue. And it's easy for a white person to tell a black person, ignore the race, even though as a black person, we grew up every single day knowing that our race was the issue. When we stepped outside the house, you know you're a black man and the cop's going to be looking at you, was a message that our parents preach. When you walk up the street, you get involved in gangs because you're a black man. We have no avenues, especially I'm 5'6". I'm not tall. I don't play basketball or have an athletic career. I can't sing. I can't hold a tune in a bucket. So race played a serious role in every single thing that happened to me as a kid. And so at 35 years old, even when I went to school, even when I went to the military, even now I'm in college, race plays an important factor. Whether it's benefiting me or whether it's negatively impacting me, race still plays a factor. So it's hard for me to listen to somebody who has never been put in a position to have race be in their face 24/7 as their identity, and just forget that, I grew up a black man. We have to talk about these issues. If we want to get past racism, if we want to get past race being an issue, then race have to be discussed, because out of all American history, racism is the only thing that has never been discussed. Racism, slavery, and these things. And I understand there's a lot of people that says, well, we didn't do it to you. Yeah, you didn't do it to me, but your ancestors did it to our ancestors, or some ancestors did it to some others' ancestors. The fact of the matter is, it happened, and this is the only thing in history that has never been discussed. We could talk about, presidents being shot and killed. We could talk about, President Trump and the insurrection at the White House, but we can't talk about race that is still prevalent today.
Okay, and when you say talk about it, what types of conversation do you think we should have? Because some people feel as if though, okay, we had slavery, it took place, it wasn't my ancestors, it was their ancestors. What type of dialogue do you think needs to be had in order to really address this issue. And once you're done, I definitely want my other two hosts to come in who happens to be females, and they're not catching it the way the black men are. One is a black female, BB, and the other is a white female. So definitely want your thoughts on this. Go ahead, Joe.
Well, in order to move past this, we have to talk about slavery. We have to talk about the impact that it had on the black community, even post-slavery. When we talk about Jim Crow, we have to talk about the fact that Jim Crow did happen, and it was less than 100 years ago. We have to talk about they did redline. We have to talk about banking rules and laws that have been put in place. We have to talk about how democratic policies affected black communities and how they group black people in certain communities and remove resources that could allow us to get ahead. But after we talk about it, we also have to start figuring out a way that we can bring back equality into the inner cities so all people can be equal. Because it's one thing to say that, no, this is America. America is equal. But another thing to not look at the poverty-stricken Black and Latino communities throughout America that is obviously not equal. So those are the things that we absolutely have to talk about. Dwell on it, no. Talk about it, find a plan to move forward, absolutely.
Okay. My two female hosts that are on the panel, what are your thoughts? BB, Heather.
Thank you, Rob. I won't be long. Thanks. It's an honor to have you on. My mother, Barbara from Harlem, wrote a book called Escaping the Racism of Low Expectations. One of the key things that why Black and Latino families are falling behind and have fallen behind is the broken home. The Black church, Black celebrities, Black media do not deal with it. Before my grandfather walked away from my grandmother, my mother their family had a working class life. After my grandfather left her in New York City, my family fell apart. My uncle was practically a genius, and he became a heroin and crack addict. It is the broken home. 3 of my uncles went to prison. At least one of my brothers went to prison because we experienced a broken home. That is the root cause. I grew up in Central Florida, so race was very important. I saw the Ku Klux Klan march. My mother, Barbara from Harlem, experienced Jim Crow law, so we're very familiar with it growing up in the Deep South. But I have to tell you, I do not blame white people. My ancestor, my great-grandmother, she started businesses in Florida. You didn't blame white people because the root cause is a broken home. Now, yes, Black men have suffered terribly. I see it with my own brothers, my uncles who were in prison, brilliant men, but because they didn't have the structure, the family structure, they were just, the negative influences, drugs, what you put in your post in your picture is correct. But I'm a little different in that I do not believe, particularly at this stage, that about white privilege. Yes, I grew up surrounded by being Black. I saw the KKK march. I was called a nigger. But I see with my straight up bare eyes, when I grew up in the 70s and 80s in Central Florida, it's the broken home. When I come into New York City, it is the broken home. Mm-hmm. My uncle didn't live in the subway platform because of white people. It was because he became a drug addict after my grandfather abandoned the family. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And something that Joe said before you jump in, Heather, is those policies of the Democrat that came out, and some would say they actually aided in breaking up the Black family, the policies of FDR and Johnson, claiming to give a hand to the family, and then if it's an institution and the Black walks out so that more money could be given, I mean, it becomes a problem. Heather, your thoughts?
Well, honored to hear you. I approach with a sense of humility because, of course, I'm not Black, and I feel, I can speak a little more, I guess, from a female perspective about the male-female thing. One thing I would say, I'm an individualist, and I know maybe in this climate, in this time, it sounds a little naive to say this, but I believe in one race, the human race. I truly do. I know that we have to acknowledge the historical horrors, and I hear you. I hear you that that was never done properly in this country. And my take is that we have a long way to go, because I don't think there has been a healthy acknowledgement of the wrongs. And I think as a result of that and other factors, we have a situation where especially the Democratic Party has constructed a narrative in which the guilt is supposed to be ongoing. And I think I'm not a fan of identity politics with regard to sex and gender or race. I feel that a lot of times this idea, I guess I would go back to the psychiatric idea of shame versus guilt. I feel like this idea that people should have a perpetual kind of sense of guilt, which I know isn't what you're saying necessarily. I think some are on the liberal side of the aisle.
White guilt.
I don't believe, whether it's white guilt, whether it's men should all feel guilty because of what some men have done and do toward women. These evils are real. These things are not to be denied. But to inflict that collective guilt, I think is, I think it's wrong. I think it's counterproductive. I think that it's not the way it works. I don't think it makes people less prejudiced, because I think people resent that, and it's discourages us from hearing each other as individuals, which is, I think, the best antidote to racism and sexism. Honestly, the kinds of dialogue that we're having now, I think, is healthy. I think to listen to each other in a spirit of fellowship and respect. We don't have to agree, but to give each other the benefit of the doubt that we mean well. I think that's the exact opposite of what identity politics does, because it assumes that the other person on the other side is part of this group that's hostile to me. So automatically, I think people are on the defensive, whether they consciously admit it or not. Rob and I have talked about this. I think a lot of this is kind of posturing. People, they want to get approval. They want to be told, you're not sexist, you're not racist. They want to parrot what they're supposed to say to be correct, but they're not really listening to your individual story. And I would much rather, I think what we're doing here is, a healthier dialogue, because it's like, let us be individuals and hear each other. We may not agree, but we respect each other as human beings.
Right.
So,
and then one of the things I want to add is that, this has been out there. These conversations, somewhat similar to this, have been out there for God knows how long. Why can't we get it right? Why is it that it's revisited over and over again?
Because I think
Joe puts a post up, and people, it's like they go crazy. Oh my God, we're not going to support you, simply because he's saying, no, this is what I see. Okay, I want to have this dialogue.
And
okay.
Can I ask, who were these people who attacked you, Joe? These were conservatives who didn't like the image, or?
I was just whoever came across it and didn't like the image. They felt it was disrespectful to them, or they felt like I wasn't talking about them. Just a bunch of stuff. And I'll say this: I can't speak from the perspective of anybody, even anybody on this panel, because I'm not you guys. I can only speak from my own perspective, and I think that's one thing that people are missing. And so it was just, it's a bunch of random people. They can support me, they can not support me. It doesn't really matter, because I'm not speaking towards a particular base. I'm speaking because, we need to help rebuild these communities and remove negative influences, so people don't have to go through, especially our younger generation, have to go through what it is that I went through just to get to where I am now.
May I say this? I think Joe's image, I'm sorry, if I could just add this. I agree with his image. Well, my perspective is the reason that we have so many negative influences is because we don't have a father. We don't have the guidance in the Black home. Black boys, and I'm saying this as a Black woman, and I've seen it. Black men have suffered more than anyone because of the broken home. I have lived it. I have seen it. That image is right on. It is spot on. Black women are held to a higher standard and treated better and are trusted more than Black men. Black men are not being taught and guided and shepherded through life. Their father is gone. The pastor's not stepping up. So his image, your image, Joe, is spot on. And I agree with it. And but I take it from the perspective of the broken home, the missing father. Talk to prisoners, talk to men on the street. Most of them were not raised with a father in the home. That is the root of the problem, not racism, in my opinion.
And Bibi, you and Barbara from Harlem mentions this, talks about this in her book, Escaping Racism and Expectations.
Yes, yes.
And I have her book up for those who are interested. It's up on the screen right now. So now I want to move on to Josh. Josh, hearing this, what are your thoughts? And again, coming from a white male who's also being told, what you're experiencing, it doesn't exist. Don't talk about it because it's not time for it. What are your thoughts about it from your point of view, being a white man, as I said, who I don't think you feel as if though you have white privilege because you have challenges also. Not every white person is rich. Maybe we can say, okay, the majority, but again, that's that group. But speaking from yourself, what are your thoughts?
Everyone said so much that I would love to comment on, and I wish I had time to comment on everything. This is really, we've gotten to some heart of a lot of different things. One thing that hit me was when Bibi was talking about her experiences growing up in the South, it reminded me of my experiences growing up when I spent several years as a very small white minority in a couple different times in my life. And I was very acutely aware of my situation. And then over the rest of my life, I've not really been able to talk. I don't know if I just never really spoke about it. I never felt comfortable talking about it, partly because I was the victim of a lot of crime and I didn't know how to talk about it without feeling like I was talking about race in a way that wasn't productive. A couple of years, maybe last year or 2 years ago, I came across someone who was another white guy who grew up in LA in a neighborhood like the neighborhood that I grew up in, Philadelphia. And it was for the first time in my life, I could speak to someone about how I grew up, the times I'd gotten mugged, the things like that, and have the other person say, I had something like that happen to me too. Took me a long time to recover. It took me a long time to make sense of it. And not come back to me and say, this is really difficult. And not come back to me and say, you are actually the cause of the problem. Maybe you had some problem, but actually it's not nearly as bad for you as it is for anybody else. That's really difficult to go one's whole life. And every time I would say I suffered, someone would come back to me with, actually, other people suffer more and people like you contributed to that. Right. Eventually you learn, or eventually I would learn, and I have to speak to a lot of other white guys who say this, we learn, don't talk about your problems because you just get them shoved back in your face. You have to support others, and we do as human beings. I think we all like to support each other. But that one experience, it was the first time in my life that I was able to just feel like someone else had my situation. Someone else, I felt understood. I felt a sense of belonging and not a sense of, don't you realize how great you have it and how much worse it is for everybody else?
Right. Now, just to put into context, to give some people some more background, I mean, I know the story that you're talking about, but when you say you were in a situation whereby you were the only white person, could you just describe that? Just give it a little bit more flavor, a context, so that people will understand exactly what you're talking about.
There's a lot to it. When my parents got divorced, they lived in a mixed neighborhood in Philadelphia. And my two sisters and I went back and forth between houses, joint custody. And my mom lived for a while on a block in Northwest Philadelphia it was all row houses. And on the block, I believe there's about 100 families, 3 white families, the rest are all black. Very economically depressed. And I don't know how much detail I should go into, but there was crime. And we eventually moved out because people picked on me a lot because of my skin was like very white. And at the time my hair was like towhead blonde, it was like just no color, it was just all white. And so that was very unusual there. And so I'd get a lot of attention. The precipitating incident was some kids took a firecracker and put it in my pocket and it went off in my pocket. And that was when my mom went to other people on the up and down the block, and she was friends with a lot of people. And they said, yeah, we don't let our boys down to down the lower end of the block, because that's where the dangerous guys hang out. And my mom said, what do you do with your boys? And they're like, we keep them inside. And she wasn't willing to keep me inside. So we moved. Now, it wasn't until very recently that I didn't realize this, that my mom pointed out that we could move away, but because we could move to an integrated neighborhood, and that would have been much more difficult for the families there that couldn't have moved away. But that was, I mean, there's a lot more stuff that happened. And it was funny because at my dad's house, it was a middle-class mixed race neighborhood. So it was back and forth between those. There were a couple other incidents, a lot of other incidents, but a couple other situations where I was one of the only white people around. But that was that's the stuff that really sticks in me. I was about 5, 6, 7, 8 years old at the time.
Right. And then it made you feel as though you can't share that because you're white, I guess, and no one wants to hear your story right now. We want to hear someone else's story.
Yeah, it was only until recently that I realized that I grew up thinking that everybody got mugged growing up. I didn't really know until recently that that wasn't the case, that most people never got mugged, let alone a half dozen times. So I didn't really talk about it because I thought I didn't think of it as unusual. It was my childhood was always like that, as were my sisters and my stepbrother and stepsister. So it seemed normal to me, but I didn't realize that people saw me as someone who didn't live that life. And they just presupposed that I lived a different life, which when I hear people talk about what I guess is like this regular suburban life, I'm not really sure. That never rings true to me. That life doesn't make sense to me. And it's not doesn't make sense. It's just I didn't live it.
Right. Andrew, your thoughts?
Yeah, just very interesting thoughts. Thank you for sharing that with us, Josh. Had to be terribly scary to go through that. And interesting, learned a lot more about Joe and his perspective on why he posted it. And hopefully it gives people an understanding of where he was coming from.
So, Joe, hearing what Andrew is saying, and then just taking into consideration your thoughts, do you see that there's any parallels, or there's just completely different pieces?
Yeah, Andrew could easily be that kid in the picture. It could be anybody, but I just can't speak from his perspective because I'm not him. I don't know what he went through. If Andrew would have made a post similar to that and I would have seen it, I probably would have liked it and commented if I had something to say or keep moving. I tried my best not to, disparage people's perspective. I know a lot of people who went through the same thing Andrew was one of. That's actually common to me, especially when I've gotten into the military. And there are a lot of guys like me in the military who went through that thing, who grew up in dangerous neighborhoods. I know a lot of people who grew up in affluent neighborhoods. I know a lot of women, and who grew up on both sides of the track as well. But at the same token, I just don't speak for them. I only speak for myself and the experiences that I went through. Not to take away from anything that he's been through. I think that's terrible, and I think he has his stride right now to where he learns from the past in order to make a better future for himself and be a positive influence and role models for the younger generations that's around him. That's the only thing that we can hope and expect. But he looks like he's doing well now. I'm doing very well right now. But these are experiences that we did have, and we can't discount that just because we think that people don't want to listen to it.
And that's a good point. Like you said, discounting, we have a black man and we have a white man with somewhat similar stories, but completely different at the same time. Because you take the black man, and as I said, as I opened up, is there a war on men? And as BB said also, is that it is even harder on the black man. But both men, because they are men, in my opinion, are being canceled and are being told you are toxic. When I saw the piece that you put out there, Joe, I thought, okay, from his perspective. But again, he is a man, he is a black man. So of course they're going to come after him. And I've got to say, the commentary that was posted from people who said they had supported him, I was shocked. And not only that, but coming from a conservative black man who's trying to reach out and hoping that the party will reach out to these neighborhoods and say, hey, we hear you. This is what we need to do. Because if they're going to grow their base, you would think that they would want to listen to what the blacks are saying. This year or last year, the Republicans got more votes from black men than they've ever gotten before, yet and still you hear the black woman, the black woman, the black woman. Not to discredit the black woman at all. Don't dare think that I'm saying that. But to discredit the black man simply because the black man voted conservatively, I think is completely wrong. To just completely try to disregard the white man because we've said, well, white men have controlled things for millions and millions of years and it's someone else's turn. In my humble opinion, you cannot build up one by destroying the other. Why can't we just come to the table and have a meeting of the minds, as Heather was saying, as you all have been saying, and have the conversation? What is wrong with having the conversation? And not only have the conversation, because I said previously, we've been having this conversation for God knows how long, and it's almost a lightning rod. It's almost things that people say and want to do to get people to vote for them. How do we get beyond the conversation to actionable items? I ask my host and my guest. How do we get beyond conversations to actionable items? And what would the actionable items look like? Because we don't want to cancel each other. We don't want to say, hey, we live in a world whereby we don't see color, because that's a lie. We do see color. So actionable items, how do we get there? So that we can stop having this conversation over and over again, so that if Joe should post something like that, people will say, I hear what he's saying. There's a black person that I knew, or a Hispanic person, or an Indian person that went through that. But as a black man, yes, he went through it. And that's not to say that he didn't go through it and that he's trying to bring up the race card, because he's being genuine. So that when Josh says, hey, as a white man, this is what I went through, we're not going to cancel him out because, oh my God, you guys have been over things for God knows how long. Shut up and go away. How do we get beyond that? What do you say, my guest and host?
Well, I think number one, we need to stop demonizing white men. Yes, there was racism. That the two factors, racism, particularly in the 17th, 18th, and 19th, 20th centuries. Then you have the 1960s after LBJ's War on Poverty, where black men were discouraged from being in the home. Those two factors, racism and the broken home. But for the dominant thing now for black people is the broken home. But actionable items, good question. I think President Trump kind of showed the way. President Trump didn't deny the racism. He provided sustainable funding for historically black colleges and universities. President Trump also signed into law the First Step Act, which was the first real prison reform act that in American history, as far as I know, which freed Alice Johnson and black men who were locked up thanks to the 1994 crime bill sponsored by Joe Biden, now president of the United States. President Trump also pushed urban zones for investment in the black community. So President Trump understood race is not going away. Racism, our past history of American racism, although we've come a long way, and Barack Obama is Exhibit A, although we've come a long way, there's still some residue of it. So the urban zones, urban opportunity zones that President Trump pushed. So he gave us actionable items, but the Democrats, unfortunately, will keep dragging the race card out. And one final thought on this, the Republican Party was started in 1854 to stop the spread of slavery. I do not know why Republican politicians run away from the fact that this party was started to help black people. The first black people were Republicans until the 1930s because of FDR's New Deal. Harriet Tubman, Mary McLeod Bethune, Sojourner Truth, Frederick Douglass, they were all Republicans. Republican politicians need to stand up and claim that history. And only Trump has done it. God bless President Trump. He gave us actionable items. Thank you.
Thank you, BB. Who else would like to jump in?
Well, I'm always going to look at role models, that who has done something like this before successfully. And if I look historically, the big one for me is Nelson Mandela, who was able to make great progress even from prison. We're in a lockdown situation. He did a lot from being under lockdown as well. Also, I had on my podcast someone who tremendously affected me. He was a he's an Orthodox Jewish guy who happened to find himself in college years ago with the Derek Brown, who actually made the Stormfront webpage. He was raised to be a white nationalist, to hate anyone who wasn't white. And when this guy on my podcast learned who he was, he invited him to have Shabbat dinner with him. And they got together, and all his friends were like, what's going on? This doesn't make sense. And they didn't talk about race. They didn't talk about racism. They didn't talk about the elephant in the room. They just became friends. They would play music together. They would talk about food and things like that. This was getting to know people, not trying to hit anyone over the head. It was empathy, compassion, just friendship. And the result was that eventually he said, he forswore what he had created and stopped doing that. And they remain great friends. I don't know if you'd call it tactic or strategy, but he simply was friends with the guy. They spoke about lots of different things. It wasn't about attacking. It wasn't about winning. Rob, when you talked about people responding, I think that when the people who responded to the image that Joe showed, I think that they were trying to find the worst interpretation they could of it, the one that would get them the most riled up, inflamed, perhaps get them the most likes or something like that on social media. If instead we change the strategy to, how can I understand this? What is the person trying to say? What's the best interpretation? What benefit of the doubt can I give? It doesn't mean you have to agree. It doesn't mean you have to like. It doesn't mean you have to support, but at least explore a couple different ways of looking at it. Mm-hmm. Now, also, if I look to myself, I realized that I held back from speaking what I can only call my truth for a long time, for fear of being canceled, for fear of people saying, not listening to me, or saying, sticking stuff back in my face. To some extent that did happen, and that taught me not to. But looking back now, I believe I could have done what I did earlier, that I could have opened up more earlier. Yes, I would have made mistakes earlier. I would have gotten possibly canceled or punished in some way earlier, but that was my responsibility. And I should have, I can't change the past, but if I could do it again, I would have come out with this earlier, taken the lumps, learned from it, and grown from it. That's hard. Not everyone can do it. But for my part, I wish I'd done it earlier. We have to be willing to, if I didn't speak, as long as I was not speaking, I was canceled. I canceled myself preemptively, but I still did. And I don't think I should have done that now.
Heather?
I'm smiling because what I wrote is, Josh sounds like a liberal, a true liberal. The left has become, I won't say conservative because there's nothing wrong with conservatism, but they've become totalitarians. They're not listening. They're not interested in relating to each other as individuals. And all the Enlightenment thought, all with the founding of this country, everything that was based on equality and relating to each other as individual children of God, human beings. To me, this is, we're taking big steps backward now under the banner of liberalism and being against hate. But really, I think there's a lot of forgetting the basics. Respect begets respect. Everything every really great spirit has ever taught us, everything Dr. King taught us, every thing, yes, Mandela, Gandhi, Lincoln. I mean, yes, how can we possibly progress if we're demonizing each other and making generalizations about groups of people based on the color of their skin or their genitalia? I mean, it's really, it's anti-intellectual, it's anti-humanistic, it's backward. The hard left has become very backward. I don't know how this happened, but the only thing I can say is, I'm with you, Josh. I think friendship, I was watching Bridgerton, to throw in a pop culture note. Listen, guys, I'm not a policy expert, but I write about culture, and there's a new show called Bridgerton on Netflix that's a big hit. And I think it's very creative, and it's an integrated cast. And one of the characters says to the other, well, you know how we became an integrated society because someone fell in love with us. And it's a cleverly written show, but it's like the point is relationships, that people fell in love and they stopped being obsessed with the color of their skin or this or that. And I don't know, maybe that's the way forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Joe, go ahead, Andrew.
Well said, Heather. I was just going to ask Joe, Rob, and Bibi. I think I've seen countless examples of one of the hardest positions to be as a Black man is to be a conservative Black man. You constantly see racism used against Black people who are conservative. Joe, you ran for office. What was that like? Did you hear a lot of racism because you were a Black man running for office against established Black woman like Maxine Waters?
No. What I heard the most of was Republicans don't care about people in the inner city. I heard that every day, all day. You Republicans don't care about us. Y'all don't do this. Y'all don't do that. And I cannot honestly understand that sentiment because you will hardly see Republicans in the inner city. And that's what I heard most. I mean, it sucks to be a Black conservative when you have people speaking for you who don't share your same perspective and they don't want to acknowledge your perspective as your own perspective. And I think that's probably like the hardest thing. Everything else, I mean, I'm a Iraqi war veteran. Nothing really bother me. But at the end of the day, I think that, we have to respect a person's perspective, respect how they grew up, respect where they came from, and then let's acknowledge it, and without getting offended, and even if their perspective even if we don't agree with it, even if it doesn't affect us.
Just to add on to what he's saying, I'm glad you reminded us that you are an Iraqi veteran, because when I saw your response to, and I'm going to call them the haters, I thought, oh my God, this guy is like no holds barred. It's like, I don't care what you think. You're either going to follow, if you're following me, you're going to support me or you don't. Whereas some people would have cowered to it and said, oh, well, I'm sorry, I offended you. But see, that's the backbone that we have to have when we approach these issues. So I take my hat off to you for being so forceful. I was surprised. I mean, I didn't think you were going to come back with a commentary, but you came back and, it was no holds barred. And
well, I don't think my freedom of speech has anything to do with anybody else's feelings, and I think that we have to keep that in mind.
Right. And when you came back and when you said that, and then when Andrew just said, how does it feel, and what were they saying as a Black conservative? And like you said, we've got to be able to identify the issues within our community, within those communities. If conservatives want people to vote for them, they have got to open up that door and they have got to walk through that door and they've got to go and they've got to talk. And right now we see a lot of old man white conservatives, and they tend to be afraid and timid. But hey, that's not going to win you a vote. And you got to be able to go to the Joe Collins and say, hey, we hear what you're saying. Let's take that out there and let's talk to people, because that Black people will listen unfortunately, when you start talking about race issues. Look at the Democrat Party. They throw race out there and we Black people will drop everything. And okay, what did you say about it? Whereas when they're talking about things that are going to really affect the community, they don't necessarily get it. So I would say to conservatives out there, if you want that vote, you've got to go out there and you've got to listen. So when the Joe Collins put up something like that people find controversial, you got to stop and say, where is he coming from? Let's talk to him. Let's see what's going on so that we can move this forward. As Bibi mentioned, you look at actionable items. You look at what President Trump did, love him or hate him. Okay, but you look at what he did. And I always say, actions speak louder than words. I can tell you that I love you all day long. But if I'm not showing that I love you, if I'm not putting it to action, oh, well, you're only doing it because you want for you. Okay, people doing, they want you to for them. And not only that, point out one other thing that I thought was interesting that I read today in the news. I'm looking at Cornel West, who, in my opinion, is a loudmouth, radical liberal. Well, it seems as though he's having a beef with Harvard. They won't give him a tenure because they're saying, oh, we're afraid to do it. Now, this just goes back to, again, the council culture. No, I don't know if that's the reason why they're doing it or they're not, but they're starting to eat their own. So if he's getting that pushback, just imagine what someone like Joe Collins is getting, the pushback that he's getting, constantly from the left. So it's just interesting, and again, having the conversation, people not being afraid to talk about it. You might not agree, and you can say, well, I've never experienced it. Okay, that's fine. You haven't experienced it, but someone else has experienced it. Going back to what Josh was saying, not wanting to say anything out of fear that he might be canceled. I wanted the two of them, Josh and Joe, on the show tonight so that they could both speak to, things that Black man and a white man, but almost, hey, I'm going through this here, and this person's going through something that's almost similar. Different color, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that people are sitting down and they're listening and they're having the dialogue, as opposed to saying, shut up, you can't have that dialogue because it's not the right time, or if you say it, we're going to counsel you, or you're not being sensitive enough, or you don't understand what's happening.
Mm-hmm. It's so ironic, too, because how can you really be sensitive to anyone who you don't talk to or listen to? It's the opposite of true sensitivity, what they're
Absolutely
forcing. It's like,
but I think, also, I want to go back to the burden on the Black man. In order to restore the Black family, we have to restore the Black male.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was growing up in Central Florida, yes, there were racists. There were racists on the police force. Not all police officers are racist. Let's be intelligent. But my mother instructed my brothers. She said, if you're stopped by the police, don't argue, don't fuss. You call me. Be respectful. As a result, my brothers never had a problem. What is happening is there's this merging of undisciplined Black males not being taught right from wrong, butting heads with out of control, sometimes racist police officers, and that's creating a lot of tragedy. In the Deep South, my mother told my brothers to be careful and respectful of law enforcement. So we had that. Although we didn't have a father in the home, we had that. Too many Black males are being, like I said, I believe, thrown up. As long as the mother or somebody's putting food on the table, paying the rent, they think that's their job. They're not raising our men, and our Black men are falling by the wayside. And I'm particularly pointing out Black men because men are to be the leaders and providers. And a woman cannot train a boy to be a man. We need fathers in the home. That is a root cause. The father in the home, we can better combat the residue of racism that still exists. But the fatherless generation that is destroying Black community, that nuclear Black family, it's what's being destroyed. And that's making our Black men vulnerable to all kinds of negative influences.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Joe, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I absolutely understand. I think, to add to that point, I think racism is probably, in my opinion, one of the least of the worries that we have to worry about, regardless of whatever skin color that you are. And just like she mentioned, police, we have gangs in our police force. We have gangs in our sheriff's department here in Los Angeles. Right now, it's not a racism thing. It's more of like a cultural thing from gang violence that is spreading throughout the South LA area. I mean, even gang violence is going up, gun violence going up tremendously, 700% since the election has been over. And so for me, when I put the post up, it has absolutely nothing to do about race. It could have been anybody in the picture, but these are the issues. You see the gang, you see the gun, you see the brains, the books, the women, the gold chains, the sports, as all influences and distractions to wherever it is that kid, personal goal might be. And like I said before, you can take, Josh or Andrew and put them in that picture and it'll still look the same to me. I'll still see a kid with some issues, and he probably needs a father. He probably needs some mentorship, but that's probably a product of where he come from.
Joe, what say you? What strength move forward to where you are? As you said in one of your postings, you're like, hey, support me or not, I have businesses, I'm doing my thing. What saved you?
Mm-hmm.
What was within that got you to keep going forward?
I've never did anything to be popular. I don't care about being popular. I've been in the military. I've been to Iraq. I fought in wars for this country. Came back, had trash talk to me for being in the military. Got out the military. I've been homeless. I've started from zero. multiple times. And I'm a builder. I can create whatever it is I want to, and I don't have to do it for hoorays, attaboys. I have a lot of self-esteem. I have a lot of self-confidence. I'm a type male, very masculine. You can call it toxic if you want to, but I'm comfortable in myself. I'm comfortable with myself. I'm comfortable being the man that I am. And one thing that I used to hate is when people would try to say things to you in order to make you feel less than yourself because the people around you have low self-esteem. Right. And I've gotten past that. So if you don't like where I am, if you don't like what I post, it has nothing to do with me. You have to find out what it is about yourself to make your self-esteem or your confidence so low to where you have to demean somebody else just to make yourself feel good.
Wow.
Love that.
You're making another run for it against Maxine Waters. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that we had a good race last time. We pulled 80,000 votes. We have a lawsuit challenging our election results, but as a Republican in a D+54 district where there's never been over 40,000 people to vote for that opponent, it's only 37,000 Republicans. We did very well. The community took to us really good as well. We're very active. We gave over 300,000 pounds of food away. We did backpack drives, on the spot hiring fairs. I hired everybody from the community to work on my campaign. We learned a lot. And it was a great experience. We even got Maxine to get out and campaign against us, something she's never done, even though she did it the wrong way, because now we're wrapped up in lawsuits for defamation and slander and things of that nature. But I mean, at the end of the day, who knows where our future may lead, and we shouldn't stop just because of somebody else's opinion. I tried to buy groceries with an opinion. People say you got $1 million smile, but you know what? I can't even buy an apple with $1 million smile. So. You know, we're gonna keep moving forward.
Well, you're definitely out there now. We definitely want to keep your name out there. And you also have you're creating a radio show to broadcast.
Yeah, well, it's an entire media organization called the New Black Republican, where we could talk about issues, world issues, or local issues from the perspective of a Black man that is a Republican from the inner city. I think is absolutely needed if we want to understand the inner cities and actually create a plan to go into the inner cities and win those people, or even if it's not about politics, if we want to go in and create better lifestyles, better schools, better businesses, better housing. I mean, it's necessary to know what we go through.
Right. And one of the things you said before on our last show is that it doesn't matter what party you're in, it's about helping the community. What is your message to Black men, to the Black community voting for Maxine Waters for the past 50 plus years and nothing has happened? What is your message to them to get them to look your way or to look at someone other than Maxine Waters?
Yeah, I'll say this: the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting different results. And we have yet to get any different results. So, you know, we got a lot of insane people in our community, but they are looking for something different. I think that we just have to be able to relate to the people in a community where it's a Black man, whether it's a white man, whether it's Latino or Asian, and, you know, speak to them in a manner that they can understand and let them know that you're not left behind. We do care. We are working extremely hard. And yeah, just like I said during the last election, I can care less what political party affiliation that you're with, because that's your own personal perspective and it has no bearing on who's coming in to build the community.
Good. I like that. And then at the same time, when you post or when someone sees a posting like that you put on Facebook, you know, stop, understand it, and ask the question as opposed to immediately going on the defense. Apparently there was an issue. People started going on the defense. But if you stop and have that conversation and understand what's being said, you know, we can all grow. Josh, what are your thoughts on the same thing? Some of the things that you've gone through. Go ahead.
If it's okay, I want to go back to what Joe was saying about, I got to comment on toxic masculinity, that
yes,
men have been men for hundreds of thousands of years that we've been human. And if we create a society in which men being men is that there's something wrong, that's men are men. If we made a society where 90% of the people in jail are men, where men don't make it through school, where there's no recess, where we die younger, where we don't get scholarships. It's to say toxic. I don't know if you guys have learned this. Something that I've observed is that when person A insults person B, person A is usually actually talking more about themselves. And so when someone says men are toxic, I think they're saying something about what they want or what they see, less about the men. And I think we live in a world in which we've created a lot of structures in society that men don't have a place in anymore. And that's not men being toxic. That's a world where men being men, I mean, I live across the street from a firehouse. These men will go into a burning building to save people. We've had all the snow, the people cleaning the city up, the sanitation workers, men. And they live to serve. We men love serving others. And to call what we do toxic, I think is missing what makes what we love to do so much. As Joe talked about serving others. And that's, I can't speak to what it's like for women, but as a man, to serve others is what gives life meaning and purpose. It's one of the main things. And if we show it in the way that men have done it for hundreds of thousands of years, to call that toxic, I think, is saying something not about the men, but the person saying it about the men.
Well, I don't know if I can speak for Phoebe, although I'm guessing I can when I say if there's a war on men, it's not coming from conservative women.
Exactly. Agreed. Thank you.
Well, I just to piggyback off of what Josh is saying, this whole notion of toxic masculinity, I think is something that was contrived, something that was created for identity politics by our brethren on the left. We love them, but I think that it's always identity trying to find something to tear down, and it simply doesn't work. Again, I point out to you Cornel West, look at what's happening to him. If anyone who is a radical and believe in all these crazy things, it's him, but look at what Harvard is doing. I think that if we take down all of these identities and this and that, stop and listen to what the other person is saying. How we opened up, is there a war on men? We've always heard that there was a war on women, and I would submit to you that war is by the left, because look at what they're doing with the whole transgender thing and women and guys participating in sports. That's another conversation. But is there a war on men? Yes, the left has created a war on men because it seems as though they don't like men. You look at this new administration, it's woman. You see a white woman, you see a black woman. Where's a black man? Okay, let's dismiss him. We got to make him pay. And as Maxine Waters once said, your opponent, you got to get her out of there. She once said, black men, we're disappointed in you. Why? Because they voted for President Trump. Shameful. Okay, they voted for him, so what? Still a man. Okay, but we definitely got to stop, listen to what the other person is saying. Only then can we grow. Only then can we move forward. Only then can we recognize the achievable, actionable items that have been set forth. You might not like the person who put them out there, but that person did do something. And it is up to us to take those actionable items and move it to the next level. It is up to us to stop and listen to what individuals like Joe is saying and recognize, okay, that's what he's saying about himself, what he has recognized. And someone else is probably saying the same thing. There's probably a little black boy out there who's saying, that's me. I'm in that picture. How do I get out? Well, they can look at the Joes of the world and say, wow, this is how I can get out. Or it might be a white person like Josh who can say, hey, I can look at this. I went through something. Don't discredit what I went through. My skin might be pale, but that's not to say that I too don't have a story or I didn't go through something. We have to stop and we have to listen as opposed to allowing the right to counsel us and say, your story doesn't count. You've done your time. You've been on the scene too long. Be quiet. It's time for someone else. You cannot build up one by destroying another. It just won't work. If we don't learn from history, we will repeat it, and it will be the same thing over and over again. Some hooray, well, between in 2045, whites will be the minority. And then what will we happen? We'll have them saying, oh, we want rights. We have to stop it. We have to stop it and listen. Be a man, this man. And this toxic masculinity, bull. I call bull on it. There are some men who are bullies, but not all men are like that. Okay, we have to respect each other, be it male or female. Who want to close this out with closing thoughts?
Amen, Rob.
Did I say it all?
Respect, these basic things that we have been taught by great leaders and by, good parents. And these are the basics. Just, I mean, how can we break down barriers if we are inflicting generalizing and stereotyping about another person who we don't know, based on what, the color of their skin or their gender. It's just flipping the script, but as I see it, it's just another form of prejudice. And I think that the left is very misguided. I think they're very lost. I think they believe that this is going to, maybe listen, I don't want to overgeneralize about everybody on the left. I don't want to do what I deplore. And I'm sure there are many, and I know there are many sincere, good people, and they believe they're doing the right thing. But I think they've been sold a bill of goods, really, that this is the way forward, to just keep focusing on the differences and try to elevate one group by casting shame on another group as a general kind of group. And I think it's just very simple. I don't think it's going to work. I think people dig in and they bury their feelings, and any psychiatrist will tell you, not that I've spent that much time on the couch, but, there's a difference between guilt and shame. Guilt can be an important part of being human. It's when you do something wrong, you feel guilty. You should feel guilty and you should be sorry and try to make amends. Shame is different. It's very unhealthy. When somebody in a family or any relationship just inflicts generalized shame and says, just because of who you are, you need to feel guilty all the time. And there's nothing you can do to expiate that, because it's just about who you are. There's something bad about you. You're toxic. On an individual level, any good therapist will tell you that's toxic, that's unhealthy, it's dysfunctional. But I think that the hard left is trying to do this on a societal level. They're calling it guilt, but I think really it's shame, that they're thinking that by inflicting shame on one group, they will elevate another group. And I don't think it's going to work. And I think that we need to get back to basics. Men and women need to try to respect each other. White and blacks, we're all human. We need to be good and give each other the benefit of the doubt. And as you said, listen.
Right.
And I see that more on the conservative side right now in history than on the left.
Right. Joe, do you have any closing thoughts?
Yeah, to go to the point, does a black man have a harder struggle than a white person? I think that, for one, we have to define what's the definition of hard and compare it to one person and another person. But also, I don't think that's the question that can be answered, because I don't know what anyone on this panel's definition of hard is. I don't know what the definition of their struggle is. God made us all different. Some people could take things that some people can't take. Do everybody have a struggle? Absolutely. Is everybody's struggle the same? Absolutely not. But can we relate? Can we come to the table and talk about it? Can we still be friends without degrading someone else's experiences or someone else's reality? Absolutely. And I think that's what we need to start doing in order to move forward productively.
And I agree, and I think that's what we have done tonight with your giving your thoughts as well as Josh's. Josh, closing thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to take what you said about listening, which I agree. I'm going to go one step farther, which is beyond listening is to make the other person feel understood. And this can be very difficult, but I love when someone does it with me, and I try to do it. It's very hard to do it with others. But after you listen, to confirm with them, let me see if I understood you right. And say back to them what they said to you, so that they say to you, yes, that's what I meant. That's what I said. And when you do that with someone, it's easy to do that with someone you agree with. When you do that with someone you disagree with, to be able to say to them, or to say, for you to say what they feel, enough that they say, yes, that's exactly how I feel. You got it. That's really hard, but that is where I think deep understanding comes from, and it enables them to open up and share more with you. And in general, enables you to share more with them. It's really hard when you feel like I'm right, you're wrong, you should just listen to me. It's really hard when you feel I'm right and you're wrong, you should just listen to me. For me to say, you tell me more and let me make sure I understand you. And it may sound like this is just a one-on-one thing, and it will change you, but I believe that systemic change begins with personal transformation. I think it always has, and I think it always will. Mm-hmm. It's hard to do, but it's wonderful when people do it to me. And I believe I think everyone feels that wonderful, that joy when you feel understood.
BB?
Yes, thanks first of all for having me on. Thank you, Joe, for your service, and Josh for telling us your stories. I think Josh and everyone on the panel, thank you. I think, Josh, what you're speaking of is empathy. We may not agree, but I want to understand where you're coming from. So I think that was expressed, I hope, somewhat tonight. I think this was a very important panel. I think we should have this discussion again, because those factors of the broken home and race have merged and converged, and it's caused a lot of pain for a lot of Black families. We see that after the LBJ war on poverty, how the Black marital rate dropped and out of wedlock births have risen because the Black man was displaced and put out of the home, if you will. That is very important. I thank you for opening up this discussion and this topic tonight, and I hope we come back to it at some point in the future. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. Andrew, our final person, thoughts?
Just thank you so much to everyone on the panel, and best of luck to Joe. 2020 was a big year for Black conservatives. Our party is finally waking up and getting some good candidates that are Black. We had Joe, we had Kimberly Klasick. I love John James out of Michigan. I thought he was fantastic. So I'm looking forward to our future in the party, and best of luck to Joe next time around.
Absolutely. And Joe, again, your people, if individuals want to get in contact with you, they can follow you on Facebook and also listen to you on your radio. Give me that title again, please.
Yeah, the radio show was called The New Black Republican. It's on KABC.com every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Pacific time. The show is extremely funny, but we talk about real life issues. You know, we just put a little twist on it. My website is joecollinsforcongress.com. You can find me on every social media platform at Joe E. Collins 3. Thank
you. And Josh?
You know, I'm going to use this moment to talk about a Black man who made a very big impression on me late in life, a 4-star general who brought me to West Point to lead some leadership workshops there. And he just became the Secretary of Defense for the United States. So former General Lloyd Austin, the woman who introduced me to him, a mentor, described him as, she would say Abraham Lincoln was the best historical leader she knew of, and Lloyd Austin was the best current leader that she knew of. And boy, did I learn a lot from this guy. And I'm glad to see him serving our nation now as a civilian. Anyway, so that's mentioning my book, Leadership Step by Step, is one place that people can find me. I'll put that one out there. There's other places too, but I'll do that one.
Okay, well, thank you all. This has been a rather informative discussion. We will have a follow-up. So thank you for joining us. We'll be live again on Tuesday at 10 p.m. Please join us. Rob and Andrew, After Dark, thank you and have a great week. Good night.
Good night, everyone.